I always thought betrayal would come with fire, shouting, plates shattering, maybe even doors slammed so hard the frame split in two. But when it finally happened to me, it was quiet. So quiet, it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. It began on a Sunday evening, the kind of evening where the world outside seemed ordinary. Neighbors mowing their lawns, children chasing each other down the street, dogs barking at shadows. Ordinary life. Inside my home, though, nothing was ordinary. I had been in the kitchen, rinsing the last of the dishes. My hands were wet, the water lukewarm. I remember the faint smell of lemon detergent clinging to my skin. I remember because, even now, I associate that smell with the moment my world broke. I heard laughter. Not just laughter, but the kind that comes from a place of deep familiarity. The kind that has history stitched into it. It wasn't the laugh of two friends. It wasn't casual, it was intimate. At first I froze, sponge in hand, dripping water onto the floor. I thought maybe I'd misheard. Maybe the television was on. Maybe they were watching something funny. But then I heard her voice, soft, hushed, followed by his. And then another laugh, muffled but undeniable. My best friend. My husband. Together. I moved quietly, though I couldn't tell you why. Maybe part of me was afraid of being seen before I was ready. Maybe some instinct told me that silence would give me the upper hand. The hallway seemed longer than ever. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it, but still, I kept walking. Step by step, when I reached the doorframe, I stopped. They were there. On the couch, close, too close. The kind of closeness that left no room for doubt. Her hand lingered where it had no business being. His body leaned in with the ease of someone who had already crossed a line long ago. Neither of them saw me at first. They were too wrapped up in each other, too sure of their secrecy, too blind to the fact that the walls I had built, walls of trust, of loyalty, of friendship, had already crumbled around us. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest rose and fell, but air wouldn't come. My body wanted to scream, to run, to demand answers. But my mind was sharper. Colder. I stood there, still as a shadow, and let the silence stretch. And in that silence, they finally noticed me. Her eyes went wide first. Shock, then fear, then a flicker of guilt she couldn't quite mask. His face followed, pale, caught, scrambling for excuses he hadn't prepared. I wish I could tell you that I cried, or that I raged, that I fell apart in the way you might expect a betrayed woman to fall apart. But I didn't. Instead, I stared at them. Long enough for the weight of my gaze to settle over the room like a storm. Long enough for them to realize that no frantic words, no rushed apologies, no stammered explanations would save them from what they had done. I could see her shifting, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt, her lips parting as if to speak but no words forming. I could see him clenching his jaw, already calculating how to spin this into something smaller, something forgivable. But I didn't give them the chance. I let the silence hold. I let it sink into their bones, and in that silence, a truth began to grow between us. A truth they couldn't run from, no matter how hard they tried. I knew then that this wasn't a moment for rage. Rage would have given them power. Rage would have made me small, hysterical, the villain in the story they would later tell. No. This was a moment for something else, so I stood there, calm. Breathing evenly now, though every inhale burned. My hands, still damp from the dishes, left small droplets on the hardwood floor. I remember staring at them, tiny circles of water, because it was easier than staring at the wreckage of the two people I trusted most. Finally, I spoke. Not the sentence. Not yet. That would come later, at the right time, when it would cut deepest. But I let my voice break the silence, low and steady. Just enough to remind them that I was not broken, not fragile, not someone they could easily explain away. "Don't move," I said. That was all. 2 words. Enough to freeze them both where they sat, and then I turned, walked back down the hallway and closed myself into the bedroom. It was only there, with the door locked and the walls between us, that I allowed myself to feel the weight pressing down on my chest. My legs gave way beneath me. I sat on the floor, my back against the bed, staring at nothing. Images replayed in my head on a cruel loop, her hand brushing his arm, his smile tilted toward her, the way their laughter had blended together like it belonged in a place I could never reach. I thought of all the years I had loved them both, differently of course, but deeply. I thought of the secrets I had shared with her, the vows I had spoken to him. How easily they had dismantled it all. But even in that moment, a strange calm lingered. Beneath the hurt, beneath the shock, there was a steeliness I hadn't known lived inside me. A voice whispering that this was not the end of me. This was the beginning of something else. The house was silent again. Silent except for the sound of my breathing, steady now. Silent except for the faint echo of laughter that still haunted the air, like a ghost refusing to leave. And as I sat there alone, I realized something. I didn't need to raise my voice to win. I didn't need to break down to prove I had been wronged. All I needed was patience and the right sentence. The sentence that would come later. The sentence neither of them would ever forget. People always think betrayal begins in the moment you discover it. But the truth is, betrayal has roots, deep ones. It grows slowly, quietly, like ivy crawling up the walls of your life until you can't tell where it began. For me, those roots stretched all the way back to childhood. I grew up in a house where love was conditional. My mother praised me only when I made myself useful. My father noticed me only when I stayed out of the way. I learned early that silence was safer than need, that being overlooked was better than being scolded. My older brother was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Every achievement of his was celebrated with fanfare, every mistake excused as just a phase. Meanwhile, my successes were expected and my mistakes, well, they were proof that I was ungrateful, careless, or simply not enough. It might sound like a small thing now. But growing up in the shadows of favoritism leaves a mark. It teaches you to accept scraps, to cling to whatever warmth you're offered, even if it burns your hands in the process. That's why, when I met her, I clung to her. My best friend. We were 12 when we met, standing awkwardly side by side in a middle school gym class neither of us wanted to be in. She had a quick smile, the kind that made you feel chosen when it was aimed at you. For the first time, I felt like I mattered. Like someone wanted me, not for what I could do, but simply for who I was. We became inseparable. Sleepovers, whispered secrets, dreams about the future. She was the one who swore she'd be by my side on my wedding day. She was the one who held me when I cried over the cold indifference of my parents. In many ways, she became the sister I never had. But what I didn't see back then was how easily she could slip into roles. How she knew exactly what to say to make you feel needed, but always managed to keep herself one step above you. If I confided a weakness, she would later use it as a story to make herself look strong. If I accomplished something, she would outshine it the next week. Still, I told myself that's just what friendship was. A balance, a give and take. And I kept giving. Then came him. I met my husband at 23. He was quiet at first, gentle in a way that felt different from the men I had known. He noticed small things. The way I twisted my ring when I was nervous, the way I hummed under my breath when I was focused. His attention felt like sunlight after years of standing in the cold. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, not the kind people write novels about. It was steadier than that. It was dinners and long walks, shared laughter over inside jokes, the kind of love that builds itself brick by brick. When he asked me to marry him, I said yes without hesitation. Of course, I introduced him to her. She was, after all, my other half, the person who knew me better than anyone. At first, I was happy watching them get along. She joked with him easily, and he laughed in a way that made me proud. I thought, this is perfect. The two people I love most in the world, loving each other too. But I should have paid closer attention. There were signs. Little ones. The way she leaned just a bit too close when she laughed. The way his eyes lingered a moment too long when she spoke. Small things that pricked at me like thorns, but I brushed them aside. I told myself I was imagining it. That old habits of jealousy planted in my childhood were making me see things that weren't there. Besides, hadn't I always been taught that I was too sensitive? That my feelings were exaggerated, my suspicions unfair? My parents' voices echoed in my head, even years later. Don't make a scene. Don't be dramatic. So I swallowed it, again. I didn't see then that this silence, the silence I had learned as a child, was exactly what they were counting on. That my ability to hold in pain without protest made me the perfect target for people who thrived on taking what wasn't theirs. Still, I wasn't blind. Even in my denial, I saw small fractures forming. Times when she'd pull me aside asking questions about our marriage that felt too personal. Times when he seemed distracted, distant, as though part of him was somewhere I couldn't reach. Looking back now, I realize the betrayal didn't start on that Sunday evening when I found them together. It had been growing for years, watered by my willingness to ignore the unease, fertilized by my refusal to confront what was right in front of me. Because here's the truth. People who betray you don't just appear out of nowhere. They are built brick by brick, moment by moment. And more often than not, we help them build the path that will one day be used to hurt us. I helped build it. I gave her my trust. I gave him my heart. And in doing so, I handed them the tools they needed to break me. But even as I say that, I don't feel shame anymore. Because if my childhood taught me anything, it's this. Surviving betrayal isn't about blaming yourself for not seeing it sooner. It's about what you do when you finally see it clearly. And by the time I stood in that hallway, staring at them on my couch, I saw it clearly. I saw them both, not as the people I had loved, but as the people they had chosen to become. And I knew I wasn't going to play my old role anymore. Suspicion doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It seeps in, drip by drip, until the air you breathe feels tainted. After the wedding, life settled into something I thought was steady. A home of our own, shared routines, weekend visits with friends. And always she was there, my best friend, woven into our lives like an extra thread in the fabric. At first, it felt comforting, familiar. She'd stop by after work, join us for dinner, laugh with us over board games. She was a constant presence, the sister I chose. And I told myself this was what happiness looked like, my friend and my husband getting along so well. But little things began to shift. Subtle things. It started with glances. Quick, fleeting, almost invisible unless you were the one watching closely. I'd catch him looking at her across the table, not the way a man looks at his wife's best friend, but the way a man looks at possibility. And I'd catch her, too. The way her smile lingered on him, the way her laugh stretched just a little longer than necessary. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself, don't be paranoid. Don't ruin this with your imagination. Childhood habits die hard, and I had been trained to doubt my instincts. But instincts don't stay quiet forever. I remember one night in particular. We'd hosted a small dinner party. Nothing fancy, just a few friends, some wine, laughter spilling late into the night. When most of the guests had gone home, she stayed behind to help me clear the table. My husband was in the kitchen, rinsing glasses. She leaned close to me and whispered something about how lucky I was, how most men didn't notice the small things the way mine did. Her eyes lingered on him as she said it. It was meant as a compliment, I think. But something in her tone, in the softness of her gaze, unsettled me. I laughed it off. But later that night, lying awake next to him, the words replayed in my head like a song stuck on repeat. Lucky. The word tasted bitter in my mouth, and then came the texts. Small at first. I'd borrow his phone to check the time or silence an alarm, and I'd see her name on the screen. Nothing damning, just jokes, little exchanges that could be explained away. But too frequent. Too familiar. When I mentioned it to him, he brushed it off with a smile. She's your best friend. She cares about us. Don't be ridiculous. And maybe I wanted to believe him. Maybe part of me was so desperate to keep the life I thought I had that I chose denial. But denial is fragile. It cracks easily. There was the day I walked into the living room and found them sitting closer than necessary, shoulders brushing. They jumped apart when I entered, laughing nervously, like teenagers caught sneaking out past curfew. There was the time I caught her wearing his hoodie, the one he left draped on the back of a chair. She claimed she was cold, but the way she hugged it around herself made my stomach twist. And then there was the silence. That was the worst of it. The way conversations would halt when I entered a room. The way their eyes would dart to me, then away, as though I had interrupted something unspoken. I told myself stories to explain it away. That they were planning a surprise for me. That my imagination was cruel. That I had been conditioned by years of neglect to see ghosts where none existed. But the truth was sharper than any story I could invent. I remember standing at the sink one afternoon, watching them through the window in the backyard. She was laughing, tossing her hair back, and he was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months. and something inside me broke. Not completely. Not yet. But a fracture deep enough to let the light in. I didn't confront them then. I didn't demand answers. Instead, I watched. Quietly, patiently. I began to notice patterns. The way his phone was always face down when she was around. The way she suddenly seemed to know things he hadn't told me yet. The way they seemed to share a language I wasn't fluent in. One night after he had fallen asleep, I sat on the edge of the bed and scrolled through his phone. My hands shook, my throat tight, but I needed proof. And there it was, a string of messages. Not overtly romantic, not explicit, but intimate. Too intimate. She wrote to him about things she never mentioned to me anymore. He sent her memes, inside jokes, pieces of himself he used to share with me. It was like watching a mirror image of our relationship, familiar but distorted. I put the phone down, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't cry, not then. I just stared at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me. And for the first time, I wondered if I was sleeping next to a stranger. The days that followed felt heavy, stretched thin. I moved through them with a calmness I didn't feel, masking the storm that churned beneath my ribs. I cooked dinner. I smiled when spoken to. I played the role of the oblivious wife while every nerve in my body screamed at me that something was wrong, until the night I couldn't deny it any longer. He left his phone on the counter, unlocked. A message flashed across the screen. Her name. 4 words, "When can I see you?" My hands trembled as I picked it up. The conversation was short, coded in half-truths, but I understood. I understood everything. That night, lying in the dark, I stared at the ceiling again. But this time there was no denial, no hope. Only clarity. The betrayal wasn't coming. It was already here, and all that was left was for me to decide what to do with it. The night I found them together wasn't an accident. It was the culmination of every glance, every secret text, every silence that had pressed against me like a weight I couldn't name. I had seen enough. Enough to know. Enough to stop doubting my instincts. And when the truth finally revealed itself, it didn't explode into my life. It slid in like a knife, silent and precise. It was late. I'd returned home earlier than expected. The house was quiet, lights dimmed. For a moment, I thought maybe I was alone. But then I heard it. Soft laughter, muffled voices drifting down the hallway. Something inside me went still. Not panicked, not frantic. Still. I moved quietly, each step deliberate until I reached the doorway. And there they were, my best friend, my husband, on the couch. Her body leaned into his, familiarity written in every line of her posture. His hand rested in a place that had once belonged only to me. They weren't rushing. They weren't fumbling. They were comfortable, as if this scene had been rehearsed countless times before. For a moment, I simply stood there. The air was heavy with the smell of wine, the faint trace of her perfume. My heart pounded, but my face remained calm. When they finally noticed me, the color drained from both of them. Her lips parted first, forming a shape that was supposed to be an apology, but sounded more like a gasp. He stammered my name as if saying it could undo what I was seeing. I didn't speak. Not yet. I let the silence stretch, pressing down on them harder than any scream could. Her hands twisted in her lap. His jaw tightened, his eyes darting anywhere but mine. I could see them both scrambling, searching for excuses, for words that would lessen the impact of what had already been done. Finally, she broke the silence. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered, a cliché. "A coward's line." I almost laughed. He added quickly, "We were just talking. You came in at the wrong time." The wrong time. I thought of all the nights I had dismissed my instincts, all the moments I had convinced myself I was imagining things. If this was the wrong time, then what had the right time looked like? I stepped further into the room, my footsteps measured. Their eyes followed me, wide, waiting for the explosion they expected. But it never came. I sat down in the armchair across from them, folding my hands in my lap. My voice when it came was calm. Too calm. "I want you to think very carefully," I said, my eyes fixed on them both. "Because whatever you say right now, it will follow you." Her face crumpled, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for this to happen. You know, you're like a sister to me." He leaned forward, his voice low, desperate. "I love you. This was a mistake. Please don't let this ruin us. Their words blurred together, excuses piling one on top of another, but I barely heard them. I watched their faces instead, the fear in their eyes, the way their bodies leaned forward, almost pleading, and I realized something then. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of being exposed. The calm inside me deepened. I let them talk themselves into circles until their voices grew hoarse, until desperation replaced confidence. And then finally I spoke. One sentence, it wasn't shouted. It wasn't cruel on the surface, but it landed heavier than anything else I could have said. I hope you two make each other as miserable as you've made me. Silence followed, heavy, final. Her mouth opened, then closed. His hands dropped into his lap. For the first time, they had no words. And in that silence, I felt the balance shift. I stood, smoothing the wrinkles from my shirt, my movements deliberate. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I didn't ask for explanations that wouldn't heal me anyway. Instead, I walked past them, each step steady, and left them sitting there in the wreckage they had created. Behind me, I heard her begin to sob. I heard him mutter my name again, softer this time, weaker. But I didn't turn back, because in that moment I understood something I hadn't before. Betrayal isn't just about what they did. It's about what I chose to do with it, and I chose not to break. That night, I locked myself in the bedroom again. I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the wall. My body trembled not from weakness, but from the weight of release. I had said my sentence. I had taken back the power they thought they had stolen. It wasn't the end of the story. Not yet. There would be fallout, whispers, sides taken, truths twisted. But in that moment, in that silence after my words, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Strength. The kind of strength that comes when you stop begging for love that doesn't respect you. When you stop giving loyalty to those who see it as weakness. The kind of strength that says, you may have broken my trust, but you will never break me. And as I sat there in the dark, the sound of their voices muffled by the walls, I repeated my sentence in my mind, over and over, like a vow. I hope you two make each other as miserable as you've made me. The days after my sentence were heavy with silence, not just in the house, but inside me, a silence that was no longer submission but choice. They tried to speak to me, at first separately, then together. Whispered apologies, frantic explanations, desperate promises. But I had already spoken the only words that mattered. Anything more would have been repetition, and repetition is for the guilty trying to rewrite their story. I didn't scream. I didn't bargain. I simply stopped giving them access to me. That's when the smear campaign began. It started quietly, the way these things always do. A cousin called me to say she'd heard I had pushed him away, that our marriage was already cold. A mutual friend hinted that I had been distant, that maybe I wasn't as devoted as people thought, and from her side came the same chorus, rehearsed in different voices. She was jealous. She was controlling. She never truly supported me. They wanted to make me the villain because villains are easier to despise than victims are to pity. I didn't defend myself. Not right away. I let them talk. I let their stories run wild, fueled by their own desperation, and slowly the truth began to unravel them, because lies are heavy things. They demand constant maintenance. They crumble under their own weight. People started noticing contradictions. A detail slipped here, an inconsistency there. The same friends who had whispered doubts to me began returning with questions, uncertainty flickering in their voices. Meanwhile, I lived quietly. I went to work. I took long walks alone. I reconnected with pieces of myself I hadn't touched in years. Every day I grew stronger in the silence they had once weaponized against me. Her downfall came first. She had always thrived on being admired, on being the center of attention. But admiration is fragile. It doesn't survive betrayal well. The same friends who once adored her now looked at her differently, whispers trailing her into every room. She found herself isolated, her charm worn thin under the shadow of what she had done. And him. He tried to hold on. He tried to apologize in public, to paint himself as a man who had made a mistake. But mistakes are slips of the hand. This was a choice, made over and over again until there was no room for doubt. I didn't fight him in court. I didn't fight for the house or the possessions. I walked away with my dignity intact, and that alone was worth more than anything else. Still, the nights were hard. There were evenings when loneliness pressed against me like a weight, when the echo of their laughter haunted the edges of my mind. There were mornings when I woke and reached instinctively for the space beside me, only to find it cold, empty. Healing is not a straight line. It is jagged, messy, full of detours. But it is still forward. And as the months passed, something shifted. The shame that had once sat heavy on my chest began to lift. The betrayal that had once defined me began to feel like only a chapter, not the whole book. I started to see myself differently, not as the woman who had been betrayed, but as the woman who had survived it without losing herself. I think often about that sentence I said to them, "I hope you two make each other as miserable as you've made me." At the time, it felt like a curse, a wound I was handing back to them. But now I see it differently. It wasn't about wishing them misery. It was about drawing a line, about refusing to carry their choices on my back any longer. They would live with what they had done, together or apart. It was theirs to carry now, not mine. As for me, I chose to live with honesty, with quiet, with a peace I had never known before. And maybe that's the strangest part of all, how betrayal, as devastating as it is, can carve out space for freedom. How loss can sometimes be the first step toward reclaiming yourself. The world looks different now. Colors sharper, air lighter. I walk with a straighter spine. I speak with a steadier voice, and though the scars remain, they are no longer marks of weakness. They are proof. Proof that I endured. Proof that I will never again settle for less than truth. Because in the end, betrayal didn't destroy me. It revealed me. And if you've ever been betrayed, maybe you know what I mean. Maybe you've felt that silence too. The silence where pain and strength meet. So now I'll ask you, the way I ask myself even now, what would you have done if you were in my place?